friends. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Boston, where on Friday a federal judge sentenced 21-year-old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev to death by lethal injection for setting off bombs at the 2013 Boston Marathon that killed 3 and injured more than 260. The sentence was issued in Massachusetts, a state which has banned the death penalty since 1987 and has not carried out an execution since 1947. Polls show 85% of Bostonians oppose the death penalty for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, as well as 80% of Massachusetts residents. But the death penalty was allowed because it was a federal trial. In a statement, the ACLU of Massachusetts said, quote, "Today's verdict does not reflect the values of the majority of people in our Commonwealth. It's an outlier and does not change the fact that Americans increasingly reject capital punishment," unquote. During the sentencing phase of the trial, Tsarnaev's lawyers focused on presenting witnesses who could convince jurors he should be sentenced to life without parole instead of death. They argued Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was a, quote, "good kid" who fell under the influence of his radical older brother, Tamerlan, and that he is now remorseful. One of the witnesses called was Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun whose story was told in the 1995 movie Dead Man Walking. She met with Tsarnaev 5 times, said he told her of the bombing victims, quote, "No one deserves to suffer like they did," unquote. Ultimately, prosecutors prevailed in convincing jurors Tsarnaev should be put to death. After the jury deliberated for more than 15 hours and announced its verdict Friday, U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz addressed the media.
Our goal in trying this case was to ensure that the jury had all of the information that they needed to reach a fair and just verdict. We believe we accomplished that goal, and that the trial of this case has shown the world what a fair and impartial jury trial is like. Even in the wake of horror and tragedy, we are not intimidated by acts of terror or radical ideals. On the contrary, the trial of this case has showcased an important American ideal, that even the worst of the worst deserve a fair trial and due process of law. Today, the jury has spoken, and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev will pay with his life for his crimes. Make no mistake, the defendant claimed to be acting on behalf of all Muslims. This was not a religious crime, and it certainly does not reflect true Muslim beliefs. It was a political crime designed to intimidate and to coerce the United States.
At least one of the federal jurors was reportedly in tears when the verdict was read. The jury was death qualified, meaning each member had to be open to considering the death penalty. Anyone who opposed it could not serve. Tsarnaev's lawyers are now expected to appeal. The process could take more than a decade to finish. Since the federal death penalty was reinstated, just 3 federal prisoners have been executed, none since 2003. Those still on death row include Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, and Jared Loughner, who killed 6 people when he tried to assassinate Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. For more, we're joined by 3 guests. In Boston, James Rooney is with us, president of Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty. In March, he helped organize a symposium called the Tsarnaev Trial, the Federal Death Penalty in Abolitionist Massachusetts. Here in New York, Eric Friedman's with us, professor of constitutional law at Hofstra Law School. He worked on many death penalty cases. And in New Orleans, Denny LaBeouf is with us, director of the ACLU's John Adams Project, former director of the Capital Punishment Project. She has 26 years' experience as a capital defense attorney. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! I wanted to begin in Massachusetts, where the Boston Marathon was. James Rooney, you're with Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty, but can you explain, I think there's a lot of confusion around the country right now, why, if in Massachusetts, where there is no death penalty, the death penalty was considered, and the response this weekend in Boston and Massachusetts overall to Dzhokhar Tsarnaev getting the death penalty?
Well, as you explained earlier, Amy, this is a federal case, and the federal government, because it's its own sovereign, gets to have its rules applied in any state, even states that don't have the death penalty. So that here, with a death-qualified jury, as you mentioned, you had 12 people from the community who said they were willing to impose the death penalty if the prosecution showed it. In terms of the reaction here, I think it's somewhat of a surprise, given the poll numbers that you mentioned showing that so many people in this state oppose the death penalty, not simply generally, but in this case. So it doesn't reflect community sentiment here. And it also, the jury appears to have acted without knowing that the family of the young boy, 8-year-old Martin Richard, who was killed in the bombing, and whom seems to have been the focus of a number of people I talked to who thought that if there was a reason to sentence Dzhokhar Tsarnaev to death, it was because of the killing of a young child. The Richard family, after the guilt version portion of the case had ended, wrote a letter which was published in the Boston Globe on the front page saying that they preferred a life sentence in this case. The prosecution in this case emphasized its view that the victims of this crime deserve to have Dzhokhar Tsarnaev put to death, including particularly for the killing of this young child. And so the jury acted with that in mind, but without knowing that the Richard family opposed a capital sentence.
So, in fact, Denis Leboeuf, the pool that was chosen of jurors, can you explain how that took place? Because you're talking about choosing from a true minority of people in Massachusetts. If 85% of Bostonians are against giving the death penalty, how many jurors came out, and what was the pool that was chosen from?
It's part of the unfairness of this system and the sort of convoluted position that the prosecutors have to put this jury in and how this process occurs. You have to ask the jury, it's a process called death qualification. You have to ask the jury, can you consider a death sentence? And they're told, don't tell us how you're going to vote, but tell us that you can seriously make a death penalty a possibility if at the end of this process you've convicted him of a death-eligible offense. And having picked some death-qualified juries in a very Catholic city, New Orleans, you watch as you lose a lot of Catholics, most of your African-American and other people of color. You lose all the people who, even for non-religious reasons, don't have a strong sense that the authorities, that the government is always right and always tells the truth and always gives you the straight angle on what's going on and what the facts are. And you're instead picking a jury from a very small, unrepresentative, very conservative, conviction-prone pool. And it's the central unfairness of this process that couldn't be more dramatic in this case.
Is this grounds for appeal?
No, I mean, it's certainly, I answered too fast. It's not grounds under current Eighth Amendment jurisprudence. It should be. It's a basic unfairness. And I think as the numbers get stronger, as the United States moves closer and closer to abolition of the death penalty, which we will get, there may be revisiting of some of the decisions. We've certainly seen that in the process of fighting this penalty for many, many years. The court has looked at a lot of issues and come away with a need.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. We're speaking with Denis Leboeuf in New Orleans. She is with the ACLU. In Boston, Massachusetts, James Rooney is with us, with Massachusetts Citizens Against the Death Penalty. And we'll be speaking with Eric Friedman, professor of Hofstra Law School, about the conviction and sentencing to death of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the 21-year-old convicted in the deaths of 3 people and the injury of over 260 in the 2013 Boston Marathon. Stay with us.